Okay, and then I don't know. Well, I'm in the position of the speaker. Is it working?
Yeah, that would be fine.
It's better, but I think we need to move as slow.
Yeah,
So,
you will.
yeah. Can I?
Sorry. You're so good.
No. Great. Yeah, maybe. See? Can you tap the broom for me? You just tap it. Fine. Can you tap it for me? Yeah. Yeah.
Do you want to hit it?
Huh?
Do you want to hit it?
Faith? I can't hear it.
You mean now should I stand at the
No, just sit there. It's fine.
It's okay, the frame?
Yeah, it's okay.
Not just like
It's fine. I can't hear. Where's Bob?
Hello, how's it going? Oh, good.
The next session, survey redistribution. One chair, Paul Micklethwaite, I'm a senior lecturer in design at and I'm a specialist in exploring what happens when design sustainability. I lead the MA course called Sustainable Design, up and up for 12 years, so I'm very interested in the idea of action in response to lots of challenges and crises that we hear so much about and that we're so much about in the previous session. I'm chair, so I'm not going to do this session. I'll just transferring it to a few short remarks. The notion of redistribution is very timely. If you follow the news in the UK, redistribution has been on the agenda. But the way you think about redistribution in terms of fairness seems to not be quite what we do relatively. When we talk about redistribution in relation to sustainability and planetary limits, we tend to think in terms of finite resources. Now, the opposite view of that is that the world can actually give us a difficult. So rather than deciding how to divide it or equitably, the other logic is that we simply seek to grow the certificate and everybody will benefit. We have understood for a long time that we live in a planet with finite resources, there are boundaries to grow, and therefore it is not really realistic to think that the growth and the pursuit of growth can be the way forward for the future. So we have 3 presentations in this session, then I'll be hosting a Q&A. First session will be online by Zoom and Pasek, talking about decarbonisation with arts. Then we'll have Stanley and Onalo talking about Pluriversal leisure, and then we will have Arjun and Harrison-Mann talking about accessing the carbon in terms of design projects. Specifically, I'm very long bio of each person. I'm not going through in detail. So firstly, we have Pasek, who's an assistant professor and currently research chair in Media, Culture and Environment at Trent University, researching towards cultural politics and climate change, with particular emphasis on the social and technical
switched to being back in the room with our next speaker, who is Onalo, a Nigerian-born art enthusiast, scientist and cyber specialist with a diverse work history, with a wide range of interests, and as a result worked in different sectors, including instrumentation engineering, logistics, project management, education, pedagogy enhancement, recent technology, etc. And now working with technology enhanced learning within Kingston University, and also completing a PhD, which I think we might hear more about. So over to you, Sam. 10 minutes, please. Thank you.
Hi everyone. Am I audible? Okay. Right, so unfortunately I might not be able to speak so much because I've got very short time. But we'll just delve right into it. As Paul's already said it, my name is Sam Onalo, and we've got Danny up there as well. This talk basically explores our current artistic research project, an artist's Pluriversal ledger, which is a thought experiment that explores the fragmented realities of climate justice, blockchain, and cultural policy. It brings Dr. Agnes and myself together, which helps us to focus on systems that build around distributed ledger systems, but then focusing on our topic, which is the Pluriversal ledger. So just getting straight into it, what draws us together is our shared interest in how blockchain might offer a potential to think through issues of intersectional inequalities, redistribution, intergenerational wealth in the arts, access to basic goods and services, domestic and transactional structure injustices, also increasing wealth and inequality gaps, entangled with ecological collapse, state failure, migration, and pandemic recovery. That's a whole lot, but that's what we're about. Our paper, sorry, I've forgotten about the presentation. Our paper is a tool that tours through the contextual background, theoretical framing, and our ways of working and collaborative exchange. An artist's Pluriversal ledger is a commission as part of Dr. Agnes's Stanley Fellowship here at SPG, and also in conjunction with KU. The project is called the Sunlight Doesn't Need a Pipeline, which is a collaborative literacy and climate justice project in search of the transformative and regenerative repair. The Pluriversal ledger employs the architecture of the virtual private blockchain, designed by myself. The VPBC is a semi-private encrypted ledger system that allows for various scales of public-private relations. The VPBC here is used to conceive of a decentralized anti-colonial system that can manage, regulate, protect, encourage, support, facilitate, and care for the interconnectedness of artists' struggles. Blockchain offers a promise, a synchronous, immutable, and distributed ledger with regularly updated user-generated transactional data. Its architecture allows for distribution and decentralization of intensifying power, incrementing labor across hands without the need for bank, state, or crown. Individuals, marginalized and restricted in terms of wealth and access, can bypass a dependency on centralized institutions to partake in forms of decentralized governance. Because of this, blockchain has found various use cases and adoptions other than its pioneering use case, a medium of exchange of value called the Bitcoin. Blockchain also comes with numerous criticisms. It has an image problem spanning criminality, Ponzi schemes, and market manipulation to immense ecological impact on Bitcoin mining, raising questions of public consensus and achieving an equitable transition to a low-carbon planet. Although there is no space and there's no time to address all these concerns here, the argument today is about the fact that blockchain is a critical tool for the imaginary. Thank you. The blockchain, from a technological perspective, can exist in two broad categories. So we've got the public, which is free to join, and the private, which is restricted and can be used for specific purposes. In my work, the VPBC, that's the virtual private blockchain, has a basic idea, which is to provide confidentiality for transactions between individuals, organizations, or cultures that do not require any significant administrative maintenance or centralized authority. This opens a possibility for an artist's Pluriversal ledger to be a dream that has the possibility or the potential to exist beyond the imaginary. We envision a scenario where the VPBC creates a secure, pluriversal, and trustless platform where artistic goods, assets, and services can be exchanged for value seamlessly without the boundary of location, language, currency, and many other currently militating factors. We expatiate on these systems in the following sections carefully, excluding the technical details of design and implementation of the system to allow for generic appreciation of solutions. The setup allows for unrestricted interaction between art suppliers, material vendors, artists, artwork collectors, and buyers without the need of trust in or between transacting users, as consensus, in this case the deal or no deal deciding algorithm, is achieved via one of two proposed mechanisms. The first is the proof of stake, which you can see to the right or to the left, and the proof of essential, which you can see to the right. The proof of stake is a mechanism that is well known, currently being used in the Ethereum blockchain and also the Cardano blockchain, but it allows transacting users to execute transactions without the need of the expenditure of exchange of any physical economic value asset until an agreed condition is met based on the resources currently available to the transaction initiating user, which will be staked to the transaction. For example, an artist who needs to produce artwork but has no materials to do so can be easily connected to a nearby art materials vendor on the VPBC. The artist possesses valuable previous work in the form of non-fungible tokens, NFTs, carbon footprint offset credit, cryptocurrency, or even physical art or properties such as land, cultural heritage which has been tokenized. This creates a substantial digital credit facility allowing for any of these resources to be used to achieve consensus between them and the vendor. Given that the value of the resource is equal or even higher than the required art materials. Both parties virtually agree on the terms and the conditions of the transaction based on the staked resources, and the vendor releases the art materials to the artist, who then, upon creation and sale of the artwork, remits the agreed value back to the vendor. This allows a seamless, trustless access to all kinds of resources provisioned by the network created by the VPBC. Now, the proof of potential, on the other hand, is a mechanism which also, I should just say at this point, is a novel system that we've designed, can be implemented based on the same principle we've demonstrated with the POS, but also in this instance, there is no staking involved. This will be beneficial to artists who, due to certain factors, so natural disaster, war, bad government, bankruptcy, you name the rest, have no access to any sort of resources as a means of exchanging goods, services, and opportunities. They would only rely on their potential, quote-unquote, to prove that they are investable. The VPBC defines this potential via a number of factors peculiar to such artists and areas of specialty, and not limited to an ability to produce art, quote-unquote, worthy of investment when given the opportunity. Each member of the VPBC then possesses a reviewable POP which allows access to opportunities, goods, and services provided by users within the system. It is pertinent to note that these technologies in the VPBC are designed to be energy efficient and promote the use of net zero resources and establishments, as these ideals is systematically accounted for, combined with the provision of substantial proof of compliance, is regarded as of great For example, in solidarity, the design of the POS and the POP consensus mechanisms completely replaces the environmentally unfriendly proof of work consensus mechanism currently used on the Bitcoin network. So just in summary, let's give an overview of an example of how this can be implemented. So one of the ways we try to implement this is to show that through access and mobility, and I'll just explain how that means. On the board, hopefully you can see on the board, we've got an example of an artist who is termed to be a mobile migrant or can be skilled without tools. And this provides a scenario of an instance into insufficient access of artists who have no access to these services, processes, professional development opportunities, materials, and travel. Every artist of the Pluriversal ledger would have a substantial tokenized credit facility which will allow artists to access materials, services, goods, as well as trade their work. A smart ledger system could have potential to redistribute finite resources and planetary limits, acknowledging historical debts. There's a lot to unpack here. There's quite a lot to unpack here. Really, unfortunately, we haven't got the time to go through everything, but I'm just going to conclude straight away. So this is such a small slice of the types of functionality that we think an artist's pluriversal ledger could account for. This talk attempts to demonstrate that decarbonisation comprises of a set of world-making practices that have displaced an entire fabric of relations between nature and culture. Through its architecture, the VBBC enables us to put our dreaming to use, amplifying a stewardship of good communication. Importantly, the blockchain does not create these relations. These forms of communion are already being built across spatial and social differences. They already exist in the mutual aid communities that hold up the state in their absence, or in the autistic networks built on affinity, or the anti-racist and decolonial practices that proliferate the art sector. But to resound Krenek's important words, dreams are important because they prevent the end of the world. We do not totally have the answers, but we do know that artists' role must change from being part of an extractive system to one that involves practicing forms of care and managing the sacred. As a thought experiment, the ledger might help us to hold less alienated forms of relation between one another, the earth, and all its inhabitants. It is in this digital communion where multiple forms of world-making must thrive. Thank you.
Who's the one based design and action studio. We very much appreciate you are with people in the communities who possibly to a role that's really careful, nurturing something that's kind of different ways to live our lives. So this means that we pause for different types of work, creativity, and so far. This means that we might produce work that can create interactions. It could be websites that run nurseries, it could be exhibition design, publications, a whole array of things. We don't really believe that our practice by reading is going to be guided by concepts and trying to show it to. And that's kind of something that for us has been quite interesting to reflect on this project, particularly when we think about the connection between the kind of processes and the industries, which are related to themselves. So with that in mind, just want to really quickly acknowledge that as a studio, we have a lot of different interests and a lot of different types of practices. We kind of see ourselves in a collection of different individual practitioners, each with a different set of research. And this kind of then comes into fruition with our collective work. So this means we might have experience around language, accessibility, inclusion, egalitarian politics, and all kinds of contexts, technology and human, sustainability, decarbonization, and such. So the reason I'm saying this is because today I'm here speaking, and that range comes from the perspective of disability justice, thinking about accessibility, and what does that mean when we start to think about that in the context of low carbon work, the context of inclusive work, particularly in this context in relation to when we think about design, platform, creating, and joint instance. And so the first thing that I wanted to put forward is something that we as a studio think about quite a lot, and within my personal work and teaching, is really this idea of like the social model of disability as a design application. So some of you, those people may have not heard of the social model before. The social model is a really key part of disability rights theory. Came out in the 70s by Oliver and Stein. And something that's kind of grown since then, but essentially it's this belief that people are not disabled, but society is disabled. And so when you kind of think about it in the context, you really have to understand how everything we produce and we curate everything we put on creates and reinforces a certain set of barriers in the world. And so what's our role as creators, what's our role as people who are congregating to kind of overcome those barriers and question why we do things in certain ways and how we address it. So with that in mind, we will start to work on the visual identity of this project, thinking about the wider discourse around design, looking at the pipeline. These kind of three key kind of things became stuff that you can reflect on them. It's going to put in some questions for you as well. You have to take a decision on that. But really, thinking about what does it mean to have an intersection design process, something that thinks about low carbon processes, thinks about accessibility in terms of removing barriers that are perhaps restricting and putting in different hands, or what does it mean to make design that is inclusive, that feels like it reflects the whole variety of communities, and feels like they have reached a feel that is really unique and very communal or great stuff. So this is the sweet spot we're aiming for, but it comes with a lot of challenges and these things will contradict each other and go against each other, and that's the thing we're trying to navigate and let's see what we'll do and stuff.
So the first question just going forward is really like, how do we decide access, diffusion, and the carbon processes that to intersectional design? I'm guilty of putting that aside. Sometimes for a long time, I felt like I could only think about one thing at a time. And that when you were thinking about accessibility was the need to really break down those barriers and think about new ways of designing access. But through the last few months working on this project, for us it's something we're trying to think about how do we approach this in an intersectional way, to start thinking about things in a schematic way and how do we use each other and become a more equitable way of designing futures. And so I'm going to try to put forward some thoughts and some questions that we've done off the basis of some of the work we've done on this project. Across this project, we working on a sort of open source visual identity. So for us, it's really thinking about how we set the groundwork for some kind of designs that feel reflective of the various communities involved in the project, but also something that you can have ownership over and you can produce your own work with and you can kind of extend it. That's actually something that's really happened, which is really exciting for us. As you can see, we've got the whole room and all the other assets in it. So thank you to everyone who's been doing that. It's been great to see it happen. We also produced a low carbon website, which hopefully some people will see. And this has been a really interesting process as well, which I'll reflect on in a second. How to make a low carbon website that's also accessible and inclusive
So here you can see. Okay, that was a video. You can imagine the website. I think hopefully you've seen it. If not, you can go and check it out. But for us, one of the key parts of this project was putting together this website that helps to embody the sense of kind of an accessible design approach, something that feels like people have ownership over it, but also is low carbon at the same time. So everything has been designed with that in mind. If you wanted to produce a truly low carbon website, you could get rid of all images, you could have it black and white, you could use default fonts, and it could be as low carbon as you wanted. You could host it on a renewable server, which we do. But that also means that actually kind of restricts a lot of other different types of access and different types of inclusion. So for us, it's always been trying to weigh up the decisions in terms of why we use certain fonts, how do we use certain colours, how do we make sure it's accessible from the get-go in terms of type size and colour contrast and all those sorts of things, which I'll get into in more detail. But throughout the whole website, we've been constantly thinking about different ways to make this a kind of low-carbon website. One of the ways, and maybe I'm sure there'll be more detail in this that other people could also contribute to the conversation, but that we think about this is essentially how do you make it as low power in terms of the amount of energy it's using. And that could be thinking about your colour choice, how much values of RGB are we using, or it could be about how do you lower your amount of images on the website, or how do you compress those in a certain way. And so for us, one of the ways that we start thinking about this is like, okay, we know there needs to be imagery in some places. Ideally, if we're trying to make a purely low-carbon site, then not, but actually that isn't a very accessible, inclusive way of doing so. So we designed a bit of code that actually compressed all the imagery and produced 2-bit imagery off the back of the stuff that's imported. So all of a sudden we're reducing the file size and reducing the amount and content in there. Okay. We also designed the site to be able to involve both text and imagery, so that way there's ways to kind of navigate that yourself. The website's been designed to be accessible, so it has color contrast options for those with different visual intents. It also increases type size, mouse size, and so on, and also facilitates the use of alt text and such. So there's different ways in which we're trying to be accessible, but also inclusive in that sense as well, and it's all powered from a server that uses 100% renewable energy. The reason why I just give you that really fast is really to talk about how does that work in terms of these three kind of sections, in terms of low carbon design, accessible design, and inclusion. Something that is accessible and inclusive might not necessarily be low carbon. How do you kind of consider that? It might not. It might be really heavy file size. You might be able to go really adventurous to some of these aesthetics that actually the way that's produced might be quite a negative impact. Something that's accessible and low carbon might not allow kind of entry into the project that you want for different communities. And something that is inclusive and low carbon might not necessarily be accessible because some accessible technologies require more power and more energy to be produced. So how do you navigate these tensions, and whose choice is to make those decisions is a really difficult one. It's something that has to happen project by project as well. So that's the idea of finding medium-specific low-carbon processes, and I won't say a lot about it, but that's kind of how the approach when it came to the science type was a very different one. We couldn't necessarily have produced that kind of piece there in the same aesthetic and the same process that we use for the website because the production process is very different. So with this in mind, when we took this project, and this is a kind of different way of thinking about visual identity because it can look very different in different contexts, we then started thinking about, okay, well, how do we use only scrap pieces of fabric used from the kind of various kind of offcuts that other people have produced. So here it's got 13 different types of materials involved in it, all of which have been offcuts from previous stuff. Working with various new chemicals, using recyclable materials in order to do the exposure, using sunlight itself. We had to black out one of our studio spaces for a whole week, and then run outside within the context of an hour, expose it, bring it back in before it overexposed. So very physical production piece as well. All kind of put together this sort of productive piece. Hopefully it starts to piece together a wider map. So I'm just going to leave it on the last couple of points really, just thinking about, I'd be really curious to hear your thoughts and your approaches to design work and other work like that, where you're trying to think of how you marry and kind of connect these things between low carbon processes, accessible design, and inclusive design. And just saying that I think this is a real learning curve for all of us, particularly for us as we go through this, and we definitely want to do this with others rather than doing it by ourselves. So there is definitely a process of collective learning, unlearning, and making and exploring to find truly intersectional design. So let's do it together, please. And just to kind of paraphrase Rosalie Schweiger, this whole thing, keep it complex, make it clear. It's a complex process. Perhaps it's a way to keep it clear.
you, Arjun. That's 20 minutes work in 10 minutes.
Gonna lie down.
So now it's about facilitating Q&A across media, across continents. So let's see how well this goes. So I guess you two guys, that might also your needs with it. Yeah. So I was making notes as we were hearing those quite diverse conversations. The role of digital technology networks in all of our lives is of course something that's inescapable. It enables, but also there's a huge cost to that, potentially. And I think it's important we do problematize that. And Arjun, the recency effect, I'll talk about you first. As you were talking, you seem to be saying that we should be suspicious of universalist approaches to this. And actually it's about locally specific and responsive strategies as to what might work in a given place at a given time. And then Samuel, you were talking really interestingly about decentralized, decolonized, trustless systems of exchange, which to some extent I guess might anonymize human interaction or human participation. And then Anne, you began by talking about how a just transition in the arts is really about communing. You didn't use that word, but that's the word that struck me. About gathering, about collaborating, about being drivers of that collective change that we need, and maybe negotiating things at a local level that will work for particular communities. So is there a question in this? I suppose, how sceptical should we be about the carbon cost of digital networks? Clearly we can't uninvent them, but should we put a lot of faith in them, or should we see them as being a kind of temporary stopgap before we truly learn how to relocalize? Samuel, what's your view on that?
Wow. It's a tough question, to be honest. Well, my understanding is that current systems and current networks serve a particular purpose, and the idea of made a very profound statement about thinking about localizing solutions when you're talking about decarbonisation. If we think in that line, think in that same process, then it makes it easier to start reimagining the ways that networks can be decarbonised, then with specific use cases that will serve specific communities, specific systems, and I would say peoples in that sense. Well, just to speak about the anonymity that comes with it, my area of specialty is security, so cyber security, which basically is where I probably will speak with more passion from, and that's why there's that area of anonymity speaking from, and because there is always the risk of your data being sourced out by people who you do not even know. As we speak in this very room, there's so much data being generated and so much data being passed around. So if we think of a way to generate wealth and then retain that wealth, there has to be some level of confidentiality that will speak to it. Now, in that sense, what we intend to do using this new systems or these new ideas would be to generate systems that will work for particular people, particular communities, and what we perceive to be sacred, what we perceive to be important, can also become sources of wealth generation. And the preservation of that wealth can then be spoken to or be used or be done using the systems that we propose. So yeah, hopefully that sort of answers the question.
Thank you. I mean, Arjun, in terms of our topic, which is redistribution and fairness, I think your whole position as a designer is about inclusion, right? We could say that. So where do you stand on this notion of redistribution and access? You know, where there are these tensions, I guess, in terms of reach and optimizing a design output in some regards, which might exclude certain audiences. How comfortable should we be with sometimes accepting that we will exclude some audiences?
Yeah, it's a really complicated one that I'm trying to unpick myself right now, so I don't know if I have a definite answer. But, so throughout the work I do in the studio and in my personal work, one of the key things that we have had to acknowledge over the years when thinking about accessibility is that a lot of different access needs clash. A lot of them contradict, and sometimes that means it's really difficult to get to this idea of 100% accessible, which doesn't necessarily exist because of the different contradictions, but sometimes complexity is needed in order to get to a more accessible route. And I think there's definitely a type of privilege involved in terms of deciding who can have access to a space and who can't. And I think I've been keen to find different ways in which we can redesign access to make sure that as many people as possible, depending on the context as well, can be included in that space. So I don't know how you weigh up like who can and can't, but I think it's definitely a conversation that needs to be happening at the beginning of every project, at the beginning of every process. It needs to happen with these communities and not for them. So I don't know if that really answers your question, but it's a messy topic, and I don't think there's a clear-cut answer for it, really.
Thank you. Anne, can you hear me? Well, fantastic. So you conducted work with some creative practitioners who have maybe grown up in this culture of internationalism and global reach of the artist. So what do you detect is the attitude there in response to the imperative to decarbonise, to move to a just transition? Is it an opportunity, or is it something that is seen as an inhibitor? Try and project across the ocean. Is there a historical analogue to this? Have we ever faced a situation like this before, which has forced art and art making to really interrogate its assumptions? we've not really talked explicitly about scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions, which is when we're talking about carbon literacy, that's really crucial. I think Annie did say that a lot of artists think about their immediate impacts, which is scope 1, but actually the scope 2 and 3 are equally significant. You know, where do you get your supplies from? With whom are you collaborating? Do you travel? Does your work travel? Is it shipped around the world, etc.? Strikes me that that's something that the art community could benefit from becoming more empowered by, to truly be informed of the impacts of their work. I mean, Sam, is that something that you've been thinking about as well, in terms of the different degrees of responsibility, I suppose, for emissions?
Absolutely. So earlier on, I spoke about the proof of potential, which is a consensus mechanism we propose. It's a novel idea, then it's less niche to this sort of area, and that sort of answers this in the sense that artists and those who sell or buy art materials and the rest of them can become a part of this network. But then there are metrics that will decide what the value of this sort of asset that you gain from this network can be based on, which, like I said, there's a lot of work that has to be done already at this point, but then there's a lot to be done in the future. But then if we're able to properly taxonomize and categorize these metrics that will decide what kinds of levels of carbon emission or proof of levels of decarbonisation, for example, that's going into generating and sourcing these materials, can then add to a certain metric that will decide what sort of value we can give to those materials on the system, and then it then translates directly to how much or what the token is valued for in general. So yeah, it's a lot to unpack, like I said, but it's an ongoing discussion, and we're still thinking through it. Hopefully we get to reasonable response in the end.
Thank you. Final question, so that we can move on to the next phase in time. Arjun, as a designer, how carbon literate are the people that commission you as a designer, your clients? To what degree of detail do you talk about decarbonisation and the content that you've introduced us today?
Yeah, an interesting question. We work with a diverse set of clients, each with their own specific research and intentions, and some are more literate on this topic. I mean, Danny's definitely taught a lot to us in this project, and this is a whole process of learning through making and with each other, and other people have different areas of expertise outside of that. And for us, what we're trying to do now is start every project with these questions in terms of what are the intentions, like who is it for, and like how do we make sure we produce a piece of work that is appropriate for that. And often it's not necessarily what is being asked for that is the most appropriate. There might be something else that is worked out through conversation. So yeah, I think it's we're quite lucky in that we work with a lot of people who have a lot of interests and a lot of nice research, and that is continually growing and developing our own understanding of it too. So yeah, I think it's about asking the right questions at the beginning and trying to figure out what's the intention and why, really.
That needs to be mainstreamed, that approach, doesn't it? Yeah. That's the big one. Beyond this gallery and the fellow travellers that we're speaking to here. I'm aware of time, so we should probably wrap up there. So thank you within this session to Anne, Sam and Arjun, and thank you for your attention. So it's 4:05, so according to my script. Now, the Glasgow Effect, Ellie Harrison and Sophie Hope in conversation. So,
Hello everyone, I'm Sophie. Nice to see you all, and thanks for inviting knowledge is making me think about, and one is like persistence and the long, slow work of getting to points like this that everyone's been embroiled in and doing for years and years. And it reminded me of a similar-ish event. I don't know if anyone was there. 13 years ago, 2009 at the Arjun. And I want a big shout out to Platform. I don't know if anyone who was working there at the time is here or is listening in. But Platform did an exhibition at the Arjun called The C Words on all sorts of really similar issues. And it just feels like, you know, that was 13 years ago, and it's about decarbonising the art sector, and how far we've still got to go, and that these conversations are still relatively marginalised. But on a plus point, I work at Birkbeck, and recently, due to the really hard, again, kind of persistent work of activists at Birkbeck, students and staff, Birkbeck are now the first university, I think in the world, to ban fossil fuel recruiters from their career fair. So that's amazing. Hopefully, so yeah, we'll just, shout out to Kaylee Woods particularly, who led on that campaign, and hopefully other universities might start following suit. Now there's one out there who's done that. And I think one of the questions, I also big up Ellie's book, which is why we are brought together after many years. Danny and Ellie sent me the book in the post. I've been reading this frantically over the last week or so. I really recommend everyone pick up a copy, buy a copy from a ethical bookstore, or just borrow it from me. The Glasgow Effect, Ellie Harrison, which we're going to talk a bit about, and the question that one of the many questions that we were thinking about having met again and talking to Danny about today was this question of what are you prepared to give up, and in order kind of to work towards and continue the process of a just transition. And and we were talking about that relationship between individual responsibility and bigger picture structural change, and the messiness and complexity around that. But I'm going to hand over to Ellie, because we've only got 45 minutes, probably less than that now, and we will hear a bit from Ellie about the way that particularly what you've been doing, I think, during the process of this commission, how that connects to the book and your environmental policy updates. And then we'll have a discussion.
Thank you so much, Sophie, and thank you to Danny. Big shout out, I don't know where she is at the moment, but thank you for inviting me all the way from Glasgow. I actually hail originally from Ealing, which isn't quite so far away. But I did come down from Glasgow yesterday. I've been living there for 14 years. Am I going to do the slides? A bit of intro. They're ready to go. Okay, thank you. I'm going to just very briefly introduce the book, The Glasgow Effect, which first came out in 2019, but was updated last autumn, actually to coincide with COP26 coming to Glasgow, and to reflect on the very eventful 2 years that had passed, obviously, during the pandemic. But this book is inspired by a project that I did in 2016, also called The Glasgow Effect, my assistant Sophie, which is based on a very simple premise. It was a year-long durational performance where I refused to leave Glasgow or use any vehicles except for my bike for a whole year, for the whole of 2016. So it proved very controversial for a number of reasons. One was because I got a grant to do it, and this idea of being paid to stay in the place where you live was very controversial to a lot of native Glaswegians who probably don't get so many opportunities to leave that city. And also because of the title, and that was a title that I borrowed from the field of population health that refers specifically well-known reason why Glasgow has such poor health outcomes compared to very similar post-industrial cities in England. So Liverpool and Manchester are the main comparators because they have very similar levels of poverty and deprivation. And there is 30% higher excess mortality in Glasgow, so that is what the Glasgow effect refers to. So I'd kind of heard that phrase before, and I wanted to, I knew it would kind of be provocative to use it as a title for an artwork, but I wanted to obviously delve into that population health research while I was in the city during that year. But also, I saw what I was doing as kind of modelling a low-carbon lifestyle of the future. And actually, when I was writing the book, and just as the book was about to come out, in 2019, I started to hear the phrase, the 15-minute city, used quite a lot, especially in Paris with Anne Hidalgo, and it kind of coming over here as a concept. And I wish I'd had that language in 2060 when I was trying to explain what I was doing, because it really, really summed it up. Yeah, so just we go to the next slide. Just to give you a flavour of my 15-minute city, this was a heat map that I produced at the end of the year with through a little GPS tracking device that I had, and I was literally just walking or cycling around the city. And when I pulled all this data together, I wanted to show, obviously, the white areas are the areas where I was frequenting, which are kind of in the city centre. And there is a real centralisation of investment in Glasgow, like a lot of money spent on regenerating the city centre. And I've marked on here the 4 big post-war housing estates that were built. So Glasgow really suffered during the post-war period, and this is one of the reasons now attributed to the Glasgow effect, in that a lot of the inner city housing was demolished. I mean, this was repeated in cities across the UK, but people were moved out to new housing estates which were really far out of the city, and then of course are having to travel in and out of the city much longer distances without adequate public transport. And then the next slide is another kind of key graphic that I made at the end of the project, which was really to highlight what I saw as the great success of the project. This is my carbon footprint for the last 18 years for transport. And one reason that I wanted to do the Glasgow effect is because I had a sense that as I was getting older and more successful, that I was producing more carbon because I was getting more opportunities to travel around. This wasn't a sustainable trajectory, that something had to give. And that at some point I was going to have to try and cut the carbon. So that's what I kind of managed to do in 2016, not to generate any carbon at all from my transport. And I've since updated this. I updated it this summer as part of my contribution to Sunlight Doesn't Need a Pipeline project, just to show the impact of the pandemic and the lockdowns in 2020 and 2021. Which immediately, when the lockdown was called, obviously kind of reminded me quite a bit of the restrictions that I placed on myself in 2016. So, just to finish up with what I've been doing over the summer for Danny's project. When Danny came to visit me, we're both based in Scotland, which is very exciting. We get to spend a lot of time together. And when Danny came to visit me, and said, would I be interested in doing something for the project? I rather cheekily said yes, but can I do what I was planning to do anyway? As a sort of kind of resistance to doing something new just for the sake of a commission. What I was planning to do, and the things that kind of always got bumped to the very bottom of my to-do list, one of them was to update this environmental policy, which I've had published on my website since 2010, specifically to include to review it, update any actions that needed updating, and to add a digital footprint section, which I think is the next one. You can look at this in more detail if you go to my website. But yeah, that was really informed by the research that Danny's been doing, the work that Pasek's been doing. I attended an amazing the workshop that she was talking about in September. And yes, it's been very, very important for me to review all the little details in this policy to check whether I'm actually still doing them 12 years after it was originally published, and to remind myself about all of these important little actions that go from, you know, small choices that I make in my own everyday life to things that I'm campaigning on a much bigger structural level. So yeah, that's a good intro. Hand back to Sophie.
Thanks, Ellie. So one of the many helpful things in the book are some really kind of specific callbacks to existing campaigns, histories of activism and change, which really reminded me that yes, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. There is a lot out there already. So I thought maybe I could invite Ellie to give us a bit more kind of information about some of these things. So one of them was an alternative to UBI. So I don't know if many people here, but I'm quite like enamoured by the idea of universal basic income. But Ellie draws attention to some of the issues with that as a possible way of redistributing time and resources. And I wondered if you could give us a bit more information about some of the kind of critiques of UBI and what the alternative, which is, you'll call it, not just you, but other people as well, are calling universal basic services, could offer in terms of this sort of discussion as well. We start with that?
Yeah, why not? So just a little bit about the structure of the book. The kind of middle section is about the Glasgow effect, my experience in doing the project, and the population health research that I talked about. The first part is a kind of preamble about why on earth I ended up in Glasgow, and that was largely because I went to the art school, and a lot of people who are on art careers kind of end up moving to like cities very far away because there's a prestigious art school there, and then they're kind of stuck in the other side of the country to all their friends and family, which of course creates more carbon. But the final part of the book is a kind of manifesto for a sustainable city of the future, where I'm kind of looking at all of the problems that have been thrown up in the previous two parts, and then really kind of mapping out my solution for a sustainable city of the future. And I guess there's two key things about it really, and informed by two books that I was reading at the time. One was the Fearless Cities book. I don't know if people know the Fearless Cities movement of radical municipalism, but this idea of needing to get power back to our cities, and Glasgow itself, obviously, like Scottish politics, is incredibly interesting, and not something that I really appreciated until a few years of having lived in Scotland, obviously with the independence movement and everything. But the fact we have a Scottish Parliament now, and it being based in Edinburgh, and Edinburgh being the capital of Scotland, but actually not the biggest city, Glasgow being the biggest city. The Scottish Parliament has actually sucked power away from Glasgow. Glasgow doesn't have any kind of regional governance structure. It's got a council, which is very dysfunctional, and we just have these unitary authorities, and there's no real kind of collaboration on a regional level. So one thing that I'm to sort out stuff like public transport, which is my passion. My main passion is public transport as well as community energy, but more public transport, and I do a lot of campaigning locally to improve public transport. But so we need much more power devolved to the city level, so that that these problems can be sorted out on a local level. And then, as Sophie mentioned, I kind of have my sort of proposal for not just universal basic services, but universal luxurious services, and that is the role of our newly empowered regional councils, is to provide these services, which mean that everybody can live a luxurious serious quality of life without needing really any money. And I kind of argue, I guess one reason that I really wanted to make this point in the book is because of the controversy that was caused around the project that I did, really because of the funding that I got, this £15,000. Everybody was really angry that I got £15,000 grant. And it was because there was this price tag attached to the action that I was doing, that this was one reason why people were so angry. So I'm kind of arguing almost against that, that we need to bring down the cost of living, as we were talking about outside, which is kind of ironic when we're in the middle of a cost of living crisis, but ultimately that's, I think, the trajectory that we need to go on, because the less money we need to live, the less we have to work, the more time we can all have to invest in our local communities and help make them better.
So on that, can you just give us a little, can you make the actual universal basic luxury services? So it's about through taxation, I suppose, progressive taxation, paying for quality public services rather than what we're going through currently, which is the stripping away of those public resources. So I guess that vision, Ellie's vision, and many others, I guess comes from that kind of socialist perspective and a way of working and living that isn't extractive, that isn't based on sticking plasters like, oh, we've got a problem here and a problem here. It's actually a fundamental reshift, we think, of how we live.
Absolutely, yeah. And this section is called Those Things We All Need to Live Happily and Well, which I think I'd actually extracted from the definition of socialism. I can't remember somewhere in here. But basically, these are the things that we need to provide, and these things, like housing, like transport, like water, like heating, like all of these things that we all need to use on a daily basis, need to be in shared communal ownership. And one of the big things that I've been doing in my own activism over the last 10 years is campaigning against privatisation of public services and public transport particularly. And yeah, we need to get all of these things back, basically, and then we can bring down the cost of them, because obviously everybody knows that our energy system is completely privatised in the UK, which is, and the stuff about the national grid that was in the news yesterday, the national grid is such a key piece of infrastructure, and it was sold off in 1990, which is, as I argued, one of the key reasons why we've got not just a cost of living crisis at the moment, but also we haven't done that strategic long-term planning about transitioning to a low-carbon energy supply. But actually what I'm arguing for is less nationalisation and more municipalisation. We want the ownership as close to the people as possible. And that means that it's owned on a city level or on a regional level rather than by big, distant national entities.
I also want to make sure people have time as well to ask questions, so do pop your hand up if you've got anything to add, any particular campaigns that you're working on or that people can connect up to. Ellie's mentions quite a lot in the book, Commonweal in Scotland, which, again, an organisation already doing a lot of this work. So I guess that call to, through acts of solidarity, fundraising, getting involved in campaigns, seems to be the way forward. We also talked a little bit, of course, about our time poverty situation and how it takes time to do the deep research, the deep listening, the deep thinking about how to change our lives and the way we operate. And often that is, we're just too in the thick of deadlines. It came up earlier, how do we do this work and also pay the rent and feed the kids and all the rest of it. So, yeah, is anyone? Yeah, please. It's all right, lovely. Take the mic, Zoe. Thank you. Hi, so hello. So I just wanted to pick up on where Ellie has put a digital footprint. She refers to the low carbon artist website checklist, which I have a load of. They're not really hard copies, but the low carbon artist website checklist came out of a project called Sustain, which I ran, co-run as Castlefield Gallery and North Centre for Contemporary Art in Denmark, and it was a digital programme with 5 artists based in each country looking at what might a low carbon art practice involve. And 2 of the artists, as you said, Heidi Nicolais and Sophie King, they made a checklist for a low carbon website, which is really great, really thorough. And they've also made a hard copy. Heidi was a residence in Manchester, did a slow travel residency in Manchester in May, June. So they made a hard copy Riso print. This is more of a kind of manifesto, but there's a QR code on it which will take you to the checklist. So I brought a few copies so if anyone would like one. Should I put them in the centre?
Yeah, definitely. We'll absolutely pass these around.
What's your name? My name is Jane Wilson, and I'm an artist formerly based in Manchester but currently based in London to do MA Art and Ecology at Goldsmith, where so many people here seem to be linked to, so hopefully I'll be seeing people again. Excellent, thank you. Any other contributions? Questions? Already hungry. We could carry on chatting for over 10 minutes. I don't know, how long have we got actually? What is our time? Of course, we must stay in this room. Now we get to the bottom of this.
It's a lot to get to the bottom of.
What's the luxury? Oh, yes, do you want to say a bit more about luxury? Luxury.
Yeah. The universal luxurious services, well, I kind of merged the concept of the universal basic services, which is the idea that all of our universal basic services, like housing, water, heating, education, health, etc., are provided for free at the point of use, with this concept from George Monbiot, which is about private sufficiency, public luxury. And I really like that because I think it really connected with this idea of what I had given up during my year, which was a sort of a kind of personal sacrifice, if you like, that I wasn't going to travel, and that actually, in terms of our individual lives, or the kind of our private lives, that we should strive to be more frugal and to cut back on things in the private realm, private sufficiency, but in the public realm, in our public services, in our swimming pools and in our public transport and in our museums and our galleries that are publicly owned, in our schools and in our hospitals and all of those things that we all rely on, that we all use collectively. Those can and should be luxurious. And George Monbiot makes this great point about, which really resonates with me as a public transport campaigner, about if you go out and buy yourself a very expensive car, a big Tesla, why not? And then everyone's got a Tesla, I know they are electric, but then you're stuck in a big traffic jam of people with Teslas. Whereas if you took, I don't even know how much they are. How much are they?
I don't.
You've got one.
Slander. 50 grand.
50 grand! If we took that 50 grand for all these people that were stuck in the traffic jam with their Teslas and we invested it in an amazing, super fast, tram system to get everybody around that was beautiful and luxurious, that'd be a much better use of the money, and it would also, get people around a lot quicker because we wouldn't be stuck in the traffic jam. So he makes this really compelling argument, and I thought, I'm gonna merge the two things
together and we'll have these universal luxurious services. And another little quote that you use is from a very British coup. I've now forgotten the name of the person that wrote the play, but does anybody know it? It's about this very left-wing kind of politician that is elected, wins an election. Anybody know this book? Anyway, the bit is when this guy he becomes the prime minister, and he's interviewed, and the interviewer says, "Are you going to abolish?" He's on a train, like on his first day as prime minister, and the interviewer says to him, "Are you going to abolish first class? Now you're going to abolish first class, because obviously we don't believe in a class society." And he says, "No, I'm going to abolish second class, because I think everybody is a first class citizen." And that I found really inspiring. So that's kind of what my theory is based on. And whether it is realistic or not, I guess what I'm trying to do in the book is also I guess model what I see the role of artists as being, is to as we've talked about a lot today. I think Sam said, or somebody said, I think it was dreams are important as they prevent the end of the world, and that it's really important that we can imagine alternative futures, and if artists can't do that, then who can?
Oh, yes, please. I think for the viewers at home. I just want to know whether there has been any space given within Glasgow for conversation after all of the anger, and obviously you had to go through that process as well, which I imagine was quite challenging. But has there been much dialogue or active space given to dialogue around the community who were angry in that sense, or was that a very media kind of blown up thing? Or, how much has this transcended locally in terms of reflection on their own, anger and what it's meant a few years down the line?
Thank you. Yeah, that's a very good question. And I guess I don't know what people in the room's knowledge of the project is, and there's a lot of detail in the book about the kind of social media backlash around it, I guess in the book I also sort of do an excavation of why people are angry, why people were angry, and give voice to a lot of their comments as well, and a lot of them kind of resonated with me. I had to sort of distance myself from the object that they were angry at, because I didn't really see that as me. I saw that I was just kind of providing a useful thing for people to shout at. So I just sort of distanced myself from that and to try to dig under a lot of the anger. Quite a bit of time has passed since then. It's 6 years, and I think that a lot of that anger, I guess that's really why what I wanted to do in the book is, as I talk about the structure, is to think about a positive way of resolving these issues. So to deal with all of this anger and all of this kind of build-up to this kind of explosion during 2016 when I did that, and then to try and unpick it and to present this positive vision. I mean, the book I've kind of offered to the city, and that's really who I was kind of imagining as I was writing it, who the audience might be. I guess young
quite detrimental, obviously, version of events, but I think it relates to the position that you're able to act from and where you're at in your life in terms of your circumstances and everything. And I think that relates to the Glasgow Effect project, but where we're at now as well. Yeah, if you want to say a bit more about that positionality of yourself, and the work you've been doing.
Yeah, that quote about fasting starving. So there's a section in the book which has got a quote that's got lots of quotes from the Facebook page where people were just venting basically. But as I said, I kind of excavated all these comments, went through them, reflected on them all, and learned a lot from them. Particularly this one by this guy called Luke Devlin, who this was kind of buried in amongst all of the memes and all of the one that before it's something like the stuff like I'm just giving an example. No, some of them are really quite nameless. But there's lots of very flippant kind of comments, and then buried amongst that, this guy Luke is like the Indian philosopher and Amartya Sen notes that there's a difference between fasting and starving. Although they're very similar types of functioning, fasting is choosing to go without food, even when one has other options. It is an exercise of choice. The ability to choose to fast as opposed to starving without choice means it means having what Sen calls effective freedom or capability. For those who don't have that effective freedom, who are starving, the one who is fasting can seem contemptuous, even if that is not the intention of the one that fasts. This is part of the reason why we're all still talking about
our project. So I read that and it kind of stuck in my mind, and I thought, yes, that is it. Like that is the reason why people are so angry. Is this decision that I was being offered opportunities to travel, and that I deliberately decided to do this action of not travelling, and that can seem contemptuous, and did seem contemptuous.
Just on that, were you actually doing a hunger strike rather than a fast? Because hunger strike is a radical, extreme act, isn't it, where we don't criticise people for being on a hunger strike because it's the real deal. So, to extend that metaphor further, do you think you're on a hunger strike? That might people responded differently.
Possibly, yeah. I haven't thought about that before, but it was a difficult thing to go through because basically everybody was willing me to fail, and that just kind of spurred me on more, I suppose. But the key thing that I kind of pick apart in the book is, and one reason why I forced myself to stay in Glasgow is because I was really questioning why on earth I'd ended up there. Like, why on earth was I living in the city so far away from all my family and friends? And I wasn't happy there, and I really wanted to leave. So rather than leaving, I decided to do this really contradictory action, which was to force myself to stay. So I forced myself to stay, pissed off the entire city, then had to stay there for a whole year with them. So it was quite challenging. It was quite challenging. But yeah, it was also, the carbon was a major part of that. And I think just to go back to this graph, like I really wanted to make this point that in relation to the money, £15,000, that we need to be valuing valuing these massive reductions in carbon. So that was kind of one of the points that I wanted to make in doing this graph, which was incredibly anal thing to do because I had to go through 18 years worth of train tickets.
I think we should stop for time. I thought that was a really good way to end actually. How can we learn to value more this negative space on the graph? You know, this lack of content, because it symbolises something really positive, doesn't it? I really enjoyed that, so I've dipped into the book. I will dip into it even more. So, yeah, well done.
Get it from the library. Reduce, reuse, recycle.
Indeed. Research